Yes. Here. Okay. Oh, you're recording? All right. Yeah. My question is for Professor Winter. You mentioned this Nero Prize for sort of the most absurd, or some might think bad idea. But we've seen sort of in society that ideas that have typically been labeled as absurd or poor have actually become really great ideas. I mean, Facebook was just a way to share photos with Harvard students and is now connecting 1 billion people across the world. So in your opinion, how do we stop society from labeling and discouraging people from pursuing absurd or ridiculous or even bad ideas when those may evolve into some of the most life-changing, world-changing ideas in the world?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's very difficult to know what's going to be fruitful and what's going to be just, let's say, a contribution to the flow of consumer goods which simply make people happy from buying and using things up and so forth. And I really don't have a very good answer for that. I just tried to raise some questions because I think we've reached a point of time in thinking and talking about innovation where it's uncritically received. If you're working on something new, something that can, let's say, be capitalized on Wall Street or a big hit in Silicon Valley, then that's enough. And I don't think that's enough by any means.
So this is for Professor Boylen. So people are bombarded by media daily, and they get tons of movements are like being thrown at them. So how do you think, is it possible to get something like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring to happen again? Is it, like that was hugely influential with just one book. Do you think that's possible to happen again, and through what kind of media?
What's your question?
So what's kind of the recipe for spreading a message through media today, do you think?
You're throwing me. I'm drawing a blank. You're saying what kind of recipe for disseminating information, trying to get people... Well, yeah, help me out here. I mean, the traditional methods, I mean, a good story, a sort of a revelation in thinking. I mean, we exist today in terms of what we know because we have had the benefit of accumulated knowledge over eons of time. And because of that, there's always new ways to put information together to raise the order of our understanding beyond what it is right now. I mean, that's what genius is. Now and then, someone comes along taking everything we know, but suddenly assembling it into a whole new order, a whole new paradigm of understanding, in this case, based on your question, the world around us, and how to move forward with that new knowledge to correct the wrongs or to disseminate information that would help us rectify what we're doing. Okay? I mean, it was purely by happenstance that Rachel Carson was just year after year, she saw fewer birds. And she began to think about, well, what was happening in the environment? How could that be explained? Back in the 70s, we had no idea that there was a global phenomenon called acid rain. We knew that fish were dying in Adirondack lakes, in Scandinavian lakes, in Canadian lakes, but no one put that information together until Gene Likens came along and published in Science that, hey, these are not local problems. These are not problems that are based on local solutions. There is something happening globally that's influencing every lake, around the world, and those events are happening thousands of miles from the source. And so it doesn't really matter, I guess, the medium. What matters is that people are out collecting information, trying to understand what is happening, and putting that accumulated knowledge together to raise our understanding. Books are good.
Could I make a follow-up comment on that? Just to understand, what is behind that question? Okay, so the thing here is, I think we live in a digital age, right? So I think there's a lot of digital noise. So everybody puts out something, but at the end of the day, are we really communicating? I don't know what is behind that question. So I think, is it just getting information out, or are we truly communicating what we want people to pick up? Yes, it's a layered problem, but I don't know what is behind that question. So just
mine is kind of like, I forgot what I was saying. Just people are asked to join all these movements, and we're from all over the place. We don't know what to choose, and it kind of feels like you're talking to a crowded room of people, and just nobody's getting the message. So how do you get that across?
Yeah, it all comes back to communication, and do you have a group of people who are interested in it? I think at the end of the day, what Coach was talking about, leadership, right? It gets to that level of interaction wherein do you have enough people buying to the vision to really go ahead and make a change? So it is a coupled problem, I guess. I don't know.
This question sort of piggybacks off of that for Professor Boylen and for anyone. We talk about Rachel Carson, we talk about Bucky Fuller and Spaceship Earth, and we talk about the first Earth Day and things that happened at the mid 20th century, and then you sort of look at now and you say, is environmentalism, in your opinion, is it still influencing people the way it did then? Do you think that it's stalled in any way? And if you do, why?
Well, look around you. Every day there are seemingly new problems. And there seems to be less effort put into solutions. I think that a lot of what we find, because of digital information and the ease at which information is spread around the globe, that even within a university, where it shouldn't happen, we're unable as a society, locally, globally, to distinguish less and less between fact and opinion. Senator Moynihan, the only quote I think I ever remember the guy saying, but he was a senator for New York for many, many years, very influential in the early days of the formation of the EPA and taking a stand for environmental causes. And he said this on numerous occasions: people are entitled to their opinion, but people are not entitled to their facts. And what we have such a blending. It's hard to hear anyone, whether it's a religious leader, a politician, a teacher, you and I, our friends. It's really hard every time someone says something to know, is that their personal opinion, or is that a fact that we can stand on? And I think that's the real danger. But environmentalism is very alive, and I think that, it's just that it's splintered, but the impact of, we're finally coming around, I thought we were finally coming around to accepting global warming, climate change, as a reality based on scientific fact. Today, in the Times Union, I'm not taking your time, Emma. Today in the Times Union, not on the front page, Wyoming rejects school science book because it talks too much about global warming as being a man-made process. Wyoming is the largest coal-producing state in the nation. So textbook selection based on science is governed by political interests in the state.
I think we're gonna take 2 more questions just in the effort of time, and then we'll move out to the auditorium, the gallery, and feel free to ask whatever you'd like.
So this is for all of you. It seems like a lot of you guys talked about, I guess, our responsibility for the planet and for other people. In order for this responsibility to exist, there has to be irresponsible people and people who don't take care of themselves and do bad things. So I'm just kind of wondering, what are we really as individuals striving for? I guess if you just look at it objectively and forget about all the irresponsible people and everything else, I guess, where does this cycle of responsible people caring for irresponsible people end, and what is our true purpose in life, I guess, as individuals?
Hey, I don't
It's
have
a
the answer.
tough question.
I just posed the question. Yeah.
I was hoping you had the answer. I was really looking forward to it.
Well, let's sort of see. The neat thing about questions like this is, it makes us think. It makes us think. Let me take that question and flip it. When you talk irresponsible people, see, the question to ask is, do we see ourselves as part of that? I think we need to be honest about categorizing people into different buckets. I think that change happens when we truly think, okay, I see some of myself in that group of people that's labeled as irresponsible. Then, if you sort of start working on that aspect from an internal perspective, you see, then it's easier to go out and be agents of change. But I think we many a times, especially, whatever the issues are, we look at these compartments. And that's, I don't know if that's the right way to go about it. Because unless we see, our own self in the light of those deficiencies, it's I don't know how to make changes, if that makes sense. That's I don't know, if that answered your questions, but just one thought.
One thing you can do, let's say, is young professionals charting careers, is to make it clear in your mind where you think the major sources of good as compared to the sources of wrongdoing are in the world. And sometimes this may, let's say when you go out looking for a job, contradict what the amount of money on offer is, for example. So personally, when I talk to students these days, I say, if you're up for a job somewhere and you're asking yourself, what am I worth? You go in and talk to an interviewer, you say, I'm worth maybe $80,000 a year starting salary. And let's say you go to Wall Street and they offer you $200,000. Then you need to ask yourself, what are they paying for? I think at that point you are so invested in the money that you'll lose track of your own principles. And I think that's a crucial question. For example, I think anybody that goes to work for a major fossil fuel company of any kind these days, who knows anything about global climate crash, needs to look very closely at the let's say, going to work for Exxon or any of the others. That's one thing you can do just personally. Say, how do my values accord with what I'm being asked to do, possibly paid to do?
Okay, so I know there are a few more. We'll take 2 more, and then we'll call it an end.
Sweet. So in the course of, this is for the entire panel, so for the course of all your talks, you've talked a lot about these kind of like larger organizational ways of thinking about ourselves, about environmental stewardship and like kind of koinonia, kind of like communion through intimate participation, especially in religious groups, these leadership groups, this society, this rhythm of community. And I guess my kind of question is, all of those things refer to kind of understanding ourselves as something more than being individuals. But when we think of our lives here at RPI, we're often encouraged to exclusively think of ourselves as individuals. Science is a team, science departments are teams and groups and organizations, but we're often told, don't worry about that, think about yourself as an individual. What do you see as being the disconnect between understanding that societies and these larger groups are not merely aggregates of individuals, but it's something else unto itself, and how we fit into it as these people with these different identities?
For me, I guess I think it is very good to think of yourself as an individual and to have individual goals, an individual drive, and individual wants that you have in your life. I think where that line is for me when I look at things is when that drive and those individual wants and that individual focus starts to come at the expense of others. And I think that it's a hard line, right? It's a really tricky and it's a murky line. I guess I'll relate it to my experiences working with our hockey players. They all have their own individual goals, and some of them want to work at NASA, and some of them want to play in the National Hockey League. And I believe one of my responsibilities is to help our individuals chase their individual goals and achieve those individual goals, but not have those individual goals come at the expense of others or of the group. And that can be very difficult. It can be very tricky. But I think that when your individualism comes at the expense of others, I think that's, for me, that's when the line is crossed.
I would like to add. I'd like to add to what Seth is talking about from the perspective of what I teach in my classes. The music that I teach is music that is created by individuals coming together as a community, and for students to understand that the different parts of the rhythms that they play on the different instruments is not going to make the magic unless they sublimate themselves to the will of the rhythm. And the will of the rhythm is a collective commitment to create this magic. So whether you're playing the bell or you're playing the calabash or you're playing a particular drum that has a certain role, all of that together is what creates the music. And if you think about only yourself in that context, and students who take my classes know this fully, what happens is you recognize that what you're playing is interdependent. And so all of the rhythms are joined together. And in the absence of you making that connection, you're not going to play the rhythm with the rest of the group, which means the rhythm's going to be off. And you're not going to accomplish that which you set out to do in terms of the impact you want to have, whether you're playing music for a social gathering or music for a religious gathering, a bembe or ritual ceremony. So going beyond the concept of doing this as in music, which I believe is a core part of our lives to begin with, and we're so disconnected from that, which disconnects us from our rhythms in relationship to other people. And so to me, this comes back to this individual idea about what are the rhythms in your mind, body, and spirit, and how do you connect them with other people? And what we have here, from my perspective, on this planet is an imbalance. We have an out of balance planet in terms of the people on this planet. And we've not yet come to terms with the balancing of energies that can manifest themselves in ways to solve any number of problems. The intellectual capital in this room is capable of solving any of these problems we're talking about. Okay? So why can't we solve them? Because it's about what I'm doing as an individual that's going to elevate my stature within this overall game. You know, many of the things that Langdon talked about in his talk regarding this whole idea, well, what is innovation? You know, are we talking about evasion or are we talking about innovation? And that has to do with how people begin to articulate what they believe is their own paradigm for how they want to act in the world. And when you assume that position, then there becomes a question of haves and have-nots. And it becomes a question of who considers himself to be responsible and what about the people we think are irresponsible. It becomes a question of black against white or against gays against straight people. And it goes on, okay? And so to me, it really is about recognizing that the individual strength is leveraged and reaches its full potential when it's working within the construct of or paradigm that includes other people. And until this planet Earth resolves that question, we're going to keep on having wars. The planet's going to go to hell in terms of all of the issues that are being talked about from a scientific perspective. And I won't be here. Because I'll be a member of the ancestors by the time all of this starts to come down. But your children and your children's children are going to be confronted with these issues. And I feel that we, the elders, have not done a good enough job of really overcoming all of these other biases that get in the way of our being able to solve real human and scientific problems that I believe firmly we have the intellectual capital to do.
Take just one more.
So this is for Coach Appert. So you were put in a unique situation, as you stated earlier, when a certain coach went after you during a hockey game. This put you in like a unique leadership position. I'm just wondering what you felt was the right thing to do, like during the situation, and then the fallout afterwards.
That's a great question. It was incredibly uncomfortable. It was embarrassing. It's not the way I want our hockey program or our university to be represented, regardless of the actions of the other side. So I think, in the heat of the moment, your first instinct is anger and is survival. I think that I was fortunate to have two great teammates in Milos Bubela and Craig Bokenfour, who stepped in for me and helped diffuse the situation. Craig Bokenfour was whispering sweet nothings into my ear. He was. It was great. To the point where he's calling me my nickname eventually. He's like, Apps, just let it go, Apps, And it was funny. But he was awesome. And I made sure that those two knew that in front of the group later on, how fortunate I felt to have the two of them. What I felt my responsibility was afterward was to walk into that press conference, to own it, to claim responsibility, no matter whose fault it was, to apologize on behalf of our university, and then also to throw my counterpart, Rick Bennett at Union, a lifeline. I thought he was potentially in a little bit of trouble there. I have tremendous respect for him as a person, as a coach. And I felt that was an opportunity to stick up for him a little bit and to say to the public how strongly I felt about him and the kind of person he is, because I thought the damage was already done and I could provide a little bit of assistance at that point.
All right. Can we please give our 5 speakers another round of applause?